Thank you, Cameron. Thank you all for being here. This is really a great honor, and it's very exciting. And I haven't been back here in 18 years. I graduated in 2000, and those numbers seem to add up, really add up quickly. But this is really exciting, and I'm very happy to talk to you about something that's important to me, that is important to all of you. The world is changing. We all share a collective history. That's one of my points I want to make to you today, is that we all share a history together. And we should strive, and we all do strive, and we should strive to save it. Because once it's gone, we'll lose it. And my other point to you is that it's not just that we're losing history or we're losing places where things happened, but we're losing pieces of ourselves, like actual, real pieces of ourselves that we lose when we lose our past. And those places will be gone, and we won't ever know about them. And so that's what I want to talk about today. And there are, I should have started there. There are places where this is happening that we might know about, like Easter Island, which is one of the most remote places on Earth. And roughly 1,000 years ago, ancient Polynesians, exploring the oceans with nothing more than the stars and the moon and the sun, found Easter Island, settled it, and immediately started building massive monumental statues called moai. And underneath these statues are platforms called ahu. And inside of the platforms are the bones of their ancestors. And these statues that we see here on the shoreline are their ancestors. They aren't symbols of their ancestors. They are their ancestors. And these shorelines are rapidly eroding because of changes in sea level, rises in sea level, exacerbated by climate change. So as sea levels rise, we lose these shorelines, and with them, the statues that ring the island. So this is the island of, this is Easter Island, also known as Rapa Nui. And every single one of those green circles denotes the location of an archaeological site. So you can see that the whole island is ringed by these statues, moai and ahu. In addition, there are volcanic rims shown, there. Oh, they don't, there are these volcanic rims that are ringed by petroglyphs, and cemeteries located along the edges of the island, with burials, inhumations of ancient Polynesians that are also eroding, washing into the Gulf, or washing into the ocean, the Pacific. So Easter Island is one example, one place where history is literally washing away. To take this example home, if we look at the southeastern United States, for example, this is work that's done by some of my colleagues, David Anderson at the University of Tennessee, and some of his students. What we see here is a map of the southeastern United States. And all of the red dots are archaeological sites at sea level that are just currently at sea level and are at risk of destruction due to erosion and sea level rise. If we look at the orange dots, then you look at the yellow dots, what they show is how sites, or how many sites, will be lost as sea levels continue to rise. 1 meter, 2 meters. With 2 meters of sea level rise, we'll lose roughly 25,000 archaeological sites. These are Revolutionary War sites, Civil War sites, Native American sites, historical sites, places of great significance. When the state of North Carolina was faced with an existential threat to one of its historic landmarks, the Hatteras Lighthouse, the state decided to move the entire lighthouse. It's a monumental task, monumentally expensive. So that's an example of preservation in action. We can save our historic places with the right amount of will, with the right amount of funding. It is a possibility. Okay. So the Southeast, we have many archaeological sites under threat with 2 meters of sea level rise. How much is the sea predicted to rise over the next 100 years? Here, this is a chart. This comes from a National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration report, but this also shows up in the UN IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report as well. It's a combination of various studies that show projections. We have a low-level projection of about 0.2 meters, high-level projection of 2 meters, and some numbers in between of just how much sea level is expected to rise globally by 2100. So roughly 80 years, in the span of 80 years. The intermediate options are the most likely globally. We're thinking a meter and a half, perhaps even 2 meters, depending upon how much glacial melting takes place. Sea level rise is not a uniform phenomenon. Locally, sea levels will rise depending upon geologic and geomorphic conditions. What is the local environment like? Unfortunately, in places like Louisiana, the predictions are dire. 5.7 feet by 2100, that's 2 meters more or less. The question is, why is Louisiana so susceptible to the consequences and effects of rising sea levels? Well, coastal Louisiana, unfortunately, is sinking. It is a deltaic plain built of Holocene sediments, so recent sediments, deposited by the Mississippi River over the past 6,000 to 8,000 years. This figure shows how much land is being lost in coastal Louisiana. So red is bad, orange is bad, yellow is bad. That's where we're losing land. Basically, it is sinking or eroding into the Gulf of Mexico. There's very little land formation actually happening. In a river system in an active delta, one would expect land growth through annual flooding and sedimentation. This does not happen because of anthropogenic or human-made impacts to that environment. The Army Corps of Engineers has leveed the Mississippi River. As a consequence, it does not flood and destroy property and infrastructure, but at the same time, it also doesn't rebuild that delta. So the whole delta is sinking into the Gulf. In addition, erosion compounded with subsidence or land sinking is causing us to lose archaeological sites and to lose land. The archaeological sites that we have in the Mississippi River Delta in coastal Louisiana encompass everything from the Civil War, Cajun and Vietnamese fishing camps, Native American villages, Native American mounds. We have a diverse array of history in one of the most unique cultural environments in the American South. Louisiana, coastal Louisiana, New Orleans. If we lose this place, we'll lose such a beautiful and significant piece of American history. What I focus on in particular are the Native American sites. It's my specialty, it's my interest. For lack of a better word, Native peoples of the southeastern United States built earthen mounds. We can call them pyramids if we want, but they look like this. This is the Poverty Point site located in north central Louisiana. This is an example of what a mound site would look like. On that bottom image, that shows a earthen mound built by humans, one basket load of earth at a time, with no assistance from draft animals, with no assistance from any kind of machines, one basket load of earth at a time to build a mound that is 70 feet tall. That's how tall it is. If we look at it from just one side of the image to the other, it is roughly 17 school buses in length. That's how long that whole platform is. And then it is 70 feet tall, 7 school buses in height. The school bus is a unit of measure, by the way. The image on the top left, that's a bird's eye view of that archaeological site. All of those rings are roughly 1 to 2 meters in height. And they are rings. They are places where houses were built, different neighborhoods, different kinds of activities were taking place on the rings in different places. And then we have this huge mound, this massive monument, built by indigenous peoples roughly 3,000 years ago. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which makes it as important as the Taj Mahal, the pyramids of Giza. It is at that same level, that same caliber. This site is not under threat from climate change, but it's an example of a Native American mound site. And we have sites that are similar to this, built of earth, monumental sites in the Mississippi River Delta that are eroding into the Gulf as we speak today. Many sites, many Native American mound sites are actually preserved because later colonists came and built cemeteries into the mounds. They are high ground. They are safe places where you can inter your dead, where you won't have tombs washing away during storms, during flood events. This is one example. This is another example. This is the Grand Caillou site. This is a place that I have studied extensively. It is around, the mound itself is quite small, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. It is made of earth, it's made of sediments. It was once part of a much bigger site, but parts of that site have been destroyed due to development and canal building. Parts of the site have eroded into bayous. We're left with this one mound. And my colleagues and I, we have studied it extensively. We have done what's called sediment coring, so we have cored into it to understand how it was constructed, when it was constructed, what types of sediments it was made from. And this is quite a technical image, but what I want you to take away from it is that the image on the top right shows a cross-section of a mound, like a layer cake. Imagine cutting a cake in half and looking at the layering. This mound was built very specifically with a clay foundation, with alternating layers of silt, and then capped again with clay. This is really geotechnical engineering. This is the same way that Army Corps of Engineers build levees today. They build them with clay foundations, with alternating layers of sediment, and they cap them with clay again to build a solid foundation for the levee so that it doesn't erode when the river comes up and down. This type of knowledge demonstrates thousands of years of experience of working with sediments and shows, and we shouldn't be surprised by this, that the indigenous peoples of the coast were incredibly sophisticated, that they understood the properties of soils and sediments. They knew how to build lasting monuments. We can call them ecosystem engineers if we want. I like that term. I also like the term nature-based architecture. But the point is, this is knowledge, scientific knowledge that we are gaining, or that we're extrapolating through the study of archaeology, through the study of the indigenous past, that would be lost if we weren't studying, and that if we were to allow it to disappear. Another finding that my colleagues and I have pulled away from our work in this region, these orange dots show at the elevations of Native American sites, and the blue line shows the average elevation. And essentially, our takeaway from this figure is that most of the archaeological sites, most of the mounded villages, are built well above average elevation, which demonstrates that indigenous peoples specifically chose to build their villages and towns on places that were high ground. And that makes intuitive sense, but we've demonstrated it using this. We've demonstrated using this evidence. This is important. This is an important finding, one that we can maybe even extrapolate to modern day development. Indigenous peoples understood, on the coast understood, building in high places was important because of storm events, because of annual flooding. And if we want to take a resilience-based lesson out of the study of the archaeological past, building on high places is just smart building, smart development. That doesn't always happen. And we can see the effects of that in places like Houston that flooded significantly during a recent storm event. Unfortunately, we are experiencing the effects of land loss and climate change in Louisiana today. And everything in this image should be a marsh. There should be no water there at all. And over the past 20 years, we have seen coastal Louisiana wash away. The state of Louisiana loses a football field's worth of land every hour. So for the time that we've been here, we've already lost 2 football fields worth of land. That's how quickly land is eroding in Louisiana. What this image shows is a marsh that was once completely intact. And in the bottom of the image, it's a little bit darker, we see some trees, some different kind of foliage. That's the location of a Native American mound, once part of a bigger village. This is what it looks like in 2011, surrounded by a healthy marsh ecosystem. It's an earthen and shell mound that was used by Native peoples roughly 600 years ago, just before European contact. They would have put structures on it, they would have fished off of it, they would have lived on it to get out of the floodplain, to get out of the marsh. This is what it looked like in 2016 when we went back to visit it. You can see it's significantly eroded away. It's 2011, 2016. You can use that tree as a reference point, that tree on the far right. This is happening everywhere. And we're losing the evidence that's contained within that mound. So there's scientific information we're losing. This was once part of a much bigger village. The red circles show the locations of where we have found archaeological remains, as well as other mounds. And today there's only one left. And that's how much of it we've lost since 2011. So we've lost more than half of it. Oh, that didn't come out too well. That's just an erosion timeline showing you how quickly we've lost this place. But when we look broadly at the landscape, when we look at how quickly sites are being eroded, based on how quickly we're losing land, based on studies of how many sites we used to have versus how many sites we have today, on average, the state of Louisiana is losing 2 archaeological sites per year. Just 2 sites, 2 historic places are gone every year. That's the average rate. So now I'm getting to the very dire consequences, and I'm getting downhill really quickly. I have one more point that's kind of a downer, but then we'll go back uphill. One point that I wanted to make to you is that losing these places is like losing ourselves. Not places where things happened, but we're actually losing a piece of our identity, of our historic past. And one way to conceptualize and think about that is to consider, there's a scholar named Edward Said, he's passed away. He was a significant humanist who had this critique, or this idea, that Western scholarship is built upon the foundations of Western philosophical thought. Positivism and science, the Greeks and the Romans, inform our understandings of Western science. And that the West, as a whole, the West as a whole, has misunderstood the other, the Orient, the East, indigenous cultures, indigenous peoples, indigenous ways of knowing the world. We call these ontologies, the way that we know about the world. And Edward Said used art as a way to critique Western thought. And this is a painting by a French author, French painter, Eugene Delacroix. And it's titled Women of Algiers in Their Apartment. And the significant point to make is in the top right, we see what looks to be Arabic script, but is in fact just gibberish. It's nothing. It's made to look Arabic, but it's not Arabic. And this was a key feature of Orientalist art of the 18th and 19th centuries. It's basically fabricating depictions of the East. And Edward Said said that by fabricating these notions of what they thought other cultures were like, European artists, European thinkers, European scholars were missing the bigger picture. They're missing the opportunity to learn about and to understand different ways of conceptualizing the world. So, if we follow Edward Said's thinking, his critique, and we try to understand the indigenous world, indigenous landscapes, as native peoples would have understood them, the ancestors of the modern-day United Homo Nation, the ancestors of the Chitimacha, of indigenous peoples who live in coastal Louisiana today. The best way to try to understand how they think about the world, one, is to ask them, which is what anthropologists do all the time. But then we can look to literature, we can look to the stories that they tell about the way they understand the world. In the early 20th century, Katherine Judson recorded stories that were told by indigenous peoples. And ideally what we want to do is we want to get these stories as close to the timeline of contact, or just before contact, or just after contact, so we can remove the interference or the influence of Western ideology and Western thought. One story in particular has a lot of salience for me, which is the story of how the world was made. The story that the Chitimacha told, the story that the Homa tell of how the world was made. And in that story, Crawfish dives into the primordial waters before the earth was ever there and finds mud and pulls it up out of the water and builds an island, mounds it up, and that becomes the earth. This process of building the earth is exactly the same process of mound building. The same process that we saw at Poverty Point, the same process that we see at sites like Grand Caillou and at Adams Bay. The building of earth, Native Americans coming together to build earthen mounds, earthen pyramids, that process is broadly analogous to the stories that they tell about the way the world was made. So in building these mounds, building these pyramids, they're building their world. They're building their community together. So these places are literal embodiments of their community, of the way in which they perceive the world around them. And so to lose that place, to lose this ancestral place, is to literally lose your community, to literally lose your sense of who you are in the world. And this, I argue, is significant. It's important that we understand that losing pieces of ourselves, pieces of our past, means that we lose pieces of ourselves. And that's a tough thing to swallow, to manage. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't become nihilistic. There's much that we can do. As young people, you can carry your truth with you. Study the world. Study science, study math, study engineering, study the environment. Advocate for the preservation of natural places, places that you find important, pieces of your past, pieces of your history. Visit these wonderful places. Go see coastal North Carolina. Go visit the lighthouse. Go visit Town Creek, which is a Native American village in eastern North Carolina. Go to Louisiana, go to New Orleans, see all these beautiful places, document them, photograph them, study them should you choose to, and advocate for their preservation. As scientists, what we do is we study, we document, we photograph, we map. We live in this great world where three-dimensional visualization is becoming easier and easier and easier. And hopefully in the next few years, my colleagues and I will start a project of creating virtual models of archaeological sites so that we can experience them from afar, but also so that we can preserve them in the face of rapid and rapidly accelerating sea level rise as exacerbated by climate change. So my message to you all is to follow your truth, advocate for the past, and be as amazing as you all are. And so that's my message. I am the stone here. You are the ripples. Carry this forward, and thank you.